Hey, how's it
How you
going?
doing? Good.
Super good.
Yeah, you look
You
cute.
look pretty. Yeah, you look cute. We look cute. It's been a good week. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's good. It's start of spring break.
Oh,
You,
really?
yes.
Ours is next week.
What are you guys
So
doing?
we're going indoor skydiving.
Yes. At iFly.
So it should be fun. Yep.
We did that with the girls when they were pretty young. It was really
Sweet.
fun. Yeah. Are you going
Yeah.
in Idaho?
No, we'll go down to Utah.
Okay. Are you going to Ogden then?
So, hmm yeah.
I'll have to ask my brothers if they know anybody that's working there right now, because that's where we went to.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But the guy
So we,
who like took us up and everything, he now
hmm
like does like farming in Utah. Like he started his own farm, a whole self-sustainable, like just
Nice.
um yeah, just conscientious farming. They're
Uh-huh.
called Argyle Acres. You should check them out. They're pretty cool.
Argyle is the one that went up with Cody when he did indoor skydiving.
Okay, yeah. He's
So,
we were at his wedding. He's one of my
oh,
brother's
really?
besties. Yeah.
I should have said something.
Yeah, you should have. Lisa seems to be having
Technical difficulties.
so
It's okay.
what go ahead and like what's the what you guys talked about
What's
perhaps
the
this like
topic for today?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, it seems like lately, um, trauma has been at the forefront of a lot of conversations. And it seems like in the course of dealing with trauma, you're kind of in survival mode. And then after trauma, sometimes weeks, months, years after, is when it's all of a sudden brought back up. It all of a sudden comes to the forefront, and you have to deal with it then. And we're going to talk about why that is and what you can do about it.
Which is excellent because yeah, that's obviously what I'm kind of running into right now for sure, or feeling
Yeah.
like just yeah, once things have like gone by and you think you're just fine, and all of a sudden some days it just hits you like a truck, you know.
Yep.
Hmm.
Comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And yes. So, and luckily, my wonderful mother is a therapist and she knows all about that kind of thing. So, we're going to talk to
And there
somebody
she
who
is.
knows. There
Can
she
you hear
is. Hi,
us?
Mom.
Hi.
Welcome back. I'm glad we can see you now.
Yes.
I'm glad I can see myself. I'm glad to know I'm actually here.
Yay.
Thanks for
Well,
Well, I
having me on. I love listening to the two of you having your conversations. I just
it's
think
a
they
lot of
we do it
fun.
a
benefit
lot.
everybody.
Yeah, that's pretty
Us for
fun.
sure. It's like we broadcast our therapy sessions with each other. So
It's true. It's true. We do. And it's wonderful. I wouldn't change a thing. Um, so we just barely kind of went over what we're talking about, how it just seems like there's been a big focus on trauma lately in our personal lives and in the personal lives of people around me. And there seems to be this little phenomenon that happens that when you go through therapy or when you go through trauma, that you're kind of in survival mode and you deal with everything the best you can at the time. But then when the big traumatic event, whatever it is over, days, weeks, months, years down the road, for some reason it comes out of nowhere and just hits like a ton of bricks and creates a lot of anger, creates a lot of sadness and resentment, and with things that seem like they should already be taken care of. And we just wanted to talk about why that is and what you can do about it.
yeah, please.
Cool. Do you just want me to dig in?
Yeah.
Well,
Answer that question.
I mean,
so why is it? Why? I mean, there's a million different kinds of trauma, right? There's deaths in the family. There's actions of other people that come in and just tear your world apart. There's family trouble. I mean, there's just the list goes on. And the chances of everyone experiencing some kind of trauma in their life is huge. So
Mhm.
so what do
And
you see?
It's unavoidable even.
we
It's
say
life.
that again.
I said it's unavoidable. It's life.
Unavoidable. Yep. Life seems to be designed to create some kind of trauma for us in some way or another. That's
Mhm.
definitely true. And because of that, evolutionarily, our bodies are designed to actually, when something traumatic happens, to shut down some part of our system. We see that
Mhm.
when our nervous system gets shut down when we're trying to deal with something. For example, when our ancestors were being chased across the plains by a buffalo or something, there's no other body systems that are available for that runner other than the body systems that enable adrenaline to go to the muscles to get that particular body out of the range of the buffalo. All the other body systems shut down. There's no processing. There's no anything that goes on. And for a while afterward, that person is not going to be able to be logical. That person is not going to be able to digest food. That person is not going to have any other body systems happening to them other than just what the adrenaline was able to do for the body and what happens afterward. We just don't do that. And the same thing is true for traumas of a different kind. The body just shuts down whatever it is that would be harmed by processing that trauma and just allows a person to maintain whatever is needed in the moment. Most people who go through a trauma will say something afterward like, I don't know how I got through it, because they really don't know. There was no decision making happening, no processing of the experience. It was just a matter of, as you said, Emily, survival. So
White
those other
knuckles and just grit your teeth and just survive it.
Yeah. And
Yeah, that makes
because
sense.
we have like 30 different systems that are happening, well, we have millions of them in our heads, not to mention the 30 systems of our body or whatever there are. Actually, probably only 5 or 6. They shut down depending on what we actually need in that moment. So let's say that I always seem to go back to this because it happened to me, that you're yelled at by your first grade teacher for being late. And you don't really deal with that. You say, that's really something awful. I don't really like it, but you don't deal with it at the time. But later, when someone else is talking to you and their tone of voice is a little bit weird, see your teacher's face and you can feel all the emotions again. Years later, why is it coming up now? And this is the body's way of saying, hey, you dealt with something a while back there. We think you're in a position now where you can address it. So we're going to have you react really out of context or out of proportion to the particular situation that you're in. So you can decide if you want to deal with that trauma that you had when you were in first grade.
So the overreaction feeling of, I mean, when something happens and you just explode. And I think we've all done that at varying degrees. Like,
I struggle
or maybe
to
it's just me.
explode. No, I think I just I think you're more normal. I think I
I don't
struggle
know.
to explode. Like
I can see that in you. You just kind of like,
keep taking it, keep taking it, keep taking
yeah.
it type thing. But
Well,
then sorry, go ahead.
no, I always see that as like, have you ever played in the ocean? Obviously, living in Florida, yes. And I've only been out in the waves a few times, really. But there's a couple ways you can handle it. You know, you can just stand there and like brace yourself and let the waves hit you and go by, or you can kind of duck under it and be like, just let it flow over the top. And I think you're a flow over the top kind of person,
Yeah. Which
like
always isn't always the best thing, you know. It feels like
well,
you know, a good thing at the time, and it might avoid immediate conflict, but it's not actually ever dealing with anything.
yeah.
You know, you can only brush so much under the rug before the rug is just a mound.
Just push
So
a
your
little more
question
under there.
really is when is the best time to deal with things? I think that's kind of what you're talking about today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you do it without it becoming an issue? How do you do it just to process it, but not to like reopen things? Just be like, how can I process
Mhm.
this without it
Or is
creating
it
an
impossible?
issue that I tried to avoid in the first place?
Well,
You know?
there's some really beautiful neural ways of healing past trauma that do not involve re-traumatization. We can talk about that. But I think the first question is, when do you process it? And you were already talking about the answer, which is when you recognize it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of us have traumas in our past that we feel like, gosh, we need to deal with it. It feels resolved enough, or at least it feels distant enough or far enough back there. It's like, doesn't really impact us. And there's no reason to go digging to say, hey, let's see if we can dig something up that needs to be buried again.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to do that. But when we find ourselves overreacting to things, and anything that we have a really strong reaction to that's really not logical, we can say to ourselves, must be some trauma in there. Then it might be time to take a look at it and see what's back there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, to
But
take this
sometimes,
really far off, that just made me think of like how much trauma there must be with like men in general for there to be so many incidences of them inflicting harm on themselves and other in like irrational outburst type ways where it's like,
Mm-hmm. Yes, we tend to think of men as not being emotional, but good research tells us, yes, they are very emotional. They respond to emotions in the same way as any other human being. They're just not as aware that an emotion is behind what it is they're doing.
or
And that they
socially allowed to.
Yes, that's part of the reason that it's not socially allowed, is because they aren't as aware of it. So you don't see too many 7-year-old boys saying, let's talk about our emotions, or 11 or 12 or 14 or 16-year-old. They're just not aware of them. And so it becomes socially unacceptable to talk about them.
Anyway,
that makes sense.
And they still promote reaction.
Yeah. It's just something that it seems like should be super important to our world right now, given like the state of things. We need to get everybody's mental health like under control, or make them realize you are not mentally healthy if you can do A, B, and C. Like that's not a mentally healthy response to life.
Yeah.
And if we start from a place where you're just supposed to have them under control, which is, I think, what you're recognizing when you sort of backed off of that, if the point is to just get it under control, we're not going to have control.
Say that again?
The point is this thing. If the point is just to have yourself under control, we're not going to get to good mental health, because good mental health is, I got some feelings that make no sense. I should probably pay attention to them.
Yeah.
Which is not the same thing as having them under control.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a question that I was wondering about, was the anger that comes after the fact. You got this delayed but justified anger. How do you deal with that without exploding, or is having some sort of explosion necessary? I mean, is that helpful, or are there other ways to deal with it that don't shower that anger on everyone around you? Does that make sense?
It's super important to acknowledge the anger in some tangible way. An explosion is not necessary, but to be able to say, I feel angry because something that was not fair or right happened to me or to someone I love, and then find a way to express that anger, preferably in a way that is visible to people that you want to see it, and at the same time, to use the word productive, that is, making a piece of artwork, for example, that expresses your anger, composing a piece of music that expresses your anger, writing a really sharp and pointed short story that expresses your anger, writing a petition to the government that expresses your anger, building a protection around a tree that you want to protect can express your anger, writing to the legislature to express your anger, suing
have
somebody,
noticed.
writing a petition to the
Yeah.
court to express your anger. All of these are really important ways. Telling someone who you feel violated by, if it's safe to do so, in some way that is meaningful to you, or writing it down and then throwing it away. Some
So
way to express anger.
do you think just being heard, like feeling like you're being heard, or is it just the act of getting it down on paper? Like getting it out of you,
Both
or
can
is
be
it?
helpful. If both can be helpful. Desmond Tutu and his daughter, who both were deeply touched by murders close to them, wrote a book about this, about how to help when you have overwhelming feelings. And this was after the genocide in Rwanda, where neighbors actually took machetes and killed their neighbors, and lots of people were left without families afterward. How do you move forward with that kind of anger that your neighbor killed your parents, for example, or your brother? And their book discusses this idea that it's important to be able to name your anger and the injustice. And if there's someone who perpetrated it, who's willing to hear it, then you have even that additional step. But for a lot of us, the things that were done that were wrong to us, there's not somebody around to hear it and hold on to it. So we have to find a way to express it.
I'm very
That makes
lucky that
sense.
I feel like like in my situation with like some of our things, like say like with Anthony's mental health and our journey that we've gone on with him, like he's in a much better place, thankfully. So there have been times recently where he's heard it, he just listened and let me talk, and I think that's what's going to be important for a lot of things, just not automatically being defensive. And I'm trying to learn from that myself, and just how I could be the person that's actually listening to people, because we all want to be heard, but we're all not very good listeners either. We just want our stuff.
It's tremendously healing to be heard without somebody explaining, giving advice, or trying to make it go away. Tremendously healing. Yeah.
Well, and I think it could also be confusing for the perpetrator. To play a little bit of devil's advocate here, like if they feel like they've healed and gotten past, to have it then thrown back in their face a bit. Is there anything you can do to help with that? I was thinking of a story
re-injure
that
them, basically. Is that what you're
yeah.
saying? Yeah.
Well, I
That's
was
what
thinking of a
thinking about.
story that with Maggie, one of my sisters. Sorry, Aubrey's leaving. I was having a conversation with Maggie a few years ago, and she was telling me about a therapist friend of hers who was dealing with a couple. The husband had been unfaithful for many years, and the woman stuck by him. And there are just many instances of infidelity. They got therapy, they worked through it, and years down the road, he says, I don't know why she's still angry. We're still going over things where she still wakes up scared. She still has paranoia. I'm not doing it anymore. Why are we still having these effects? And that one pops into my head a lot. Like, anyway, yeah.
I feel like I mean, I know I'm not the professional, but it's like once a certain trust has been broken, it's hard to rebuild it, because you believe that thing can never happen because you've given trust. So when it happens, it's like, why would it be so stupid as to do that again? It's like a survival thing. But
and when
you
see those, when you see those little hints in your life of like, oh, somebody's texting him, or he's late home from work or whatever, it's almost like it's happening again, even if it's not, right? I mean, is that
trauma triggers?
Trauma triggers.
So there are two answers to that.
Okay.
One is that there really are some neural techniques that we have that can settle down those trauma triggers if you decide that you feel safe enough that you want to settle them down. I mean, the reason we have trauma triggers is so we don't get ourselves in a situation where we're a sitting duck for trauma again. And there has to be in the back of her mind. Yeah. If there's somebody that he's getting close to again and he's getting secretive again, we don't want her to say,
but he's not doing that anymore.
Worry. I'm fine. We want her to maintain some sense of Here's the things that you have to be alert for. And when she's ready to say, I think I know what those are. I think I'm okay. I'd really like for all these triggers to go. Then we have some trauma therapies. But on the other hand, it's really important for a period of time, and nobody can say how long or short this period of time is, for her to be able to wake up and say, I had that nightmare again that you were having an affair. Are you there for me? Can you hold me through that? Can you still be here for me? Which is the balancing out of having hurt someone. When we hurt someone, the balancing out is, I'll be there for you when you re-experience that hurt. I'm not going to run away from you and tell you you should be over that because I contributed to that hurt. So that's an important part of the healing too. We don't want somebody to like forgive so fast that they don't actually address those feelings of hurt and do the reconnection of those, what we call attachment injuries and wounds.
Well, it reminds me of the fire that you went through, Rachel. Like after that big trauma, you still had like nightmares and things afterwards.
Which is why we ended up leaving the house ultimately, just because it was like I was waking up thinking I was hearing the alarm again. It was like waking me up, but it wasn't really going off. So I was just getting woke up, and Bella was putting her toys by the back door to save for the next, because she just didn't want to lose everything again. So, and then it changed us in good ways too. Like we don't wait for a special event to wear the dress or to use the toy or anything like that anymore, because we had too many things that we hadn't even used yet. So it taught us a very valuable lesson about, just how quickly things can change.
Yeah.
So the good and the bad. But yeah, that was definitely one of those with some trauma responses, and moving, I think, helped a lot with that. But still, when like a fire alarm or something goes off, we do kind of like,
you're right back there for a second.
It's survivor mode for a moment of just like, oh my God, not again.
Yeah.
So
grab the kids and run.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole thing about where it's important. Like it's our survival thing. We know that because we know that is a real fear. That while it's very slim, I've been in 2 burning homes. So maybe I should just be watching out for my fire demon, real close.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's that. Sorry, we kind of took that on a little different trauma.
No, that illustrates that trauma teaches us both positive things, like this. We're going to wear the dress, we're going to use the toy, we're going to get out the good china or whatever it is. Trauma taught them that. And also there's some triggers that are like, dang it, we got that upset feeling again, and it wasn't even an alarm. That's what trauma does for us, is it does both of those things.
It's like a really useful thing our body does that is like on overdrive, because we're not in survival instinct so much anymore. We have homes, we have food, we don't need all these responses, but they're still there to keep us alive. We're just not sitting in, it's like we're less equipped to deal with them because we overreact to things.
Well, that does teach us when we overreact. It does teach us, hey, there's something here that can be healed. And whenever we heal something, the system becomes better than it was before the injury. That's the beautiful thing about healing. So it's an opportunity to actually improve the whole system.
Yeah.
I've experienced that too. Yeah. Like I've definitely healed from some things. It's just, there are just things that will just sneak up on you and you're like, why is this feeling this way all over again? And then so obviously you could think you're healed or you've dealt with it, but there's aspects of everything that just kind of go back and get you.
Trauma comes in varieties. That the reason that it's trauma is it teaches us something about ourselves that is not helpful. Something like, I'm not safe, just in general. I mean, that's the feeling you wake up when you're hearing an alarm, is that feeling of I'm not safe, or I'm not lovable, or I'm inadequate, or I'm powerless, I'm helpless, there's something I can't do, or else I'm not okay. I'm not okay if I speak in public, for example, or I'm not okay if someone criticizes me. I'm not okay if my children are upset at me, or my husband's upset at me, or whatever it is. This is what trauma teaches us, and that's generally what gets activated when we talk about trauma triggers, is that feeling of I'm not okay for one of these reasons. And that's why we call it trauma, is because we're not okay in that moment. We just don't have all of our faculties. The brain has gone to the same place that it went to when there was the original trouble. And part of our faculties are no longer accessible to us. And we panic a little bit.
Oh yeah, not even a little bit. I can feel what you're talking about just saying it. Like even though I'm not the type to fight back, like things would just full on shut me down into like a panic state of where my thoughts, they're just not clear. My movements are like nothing. It's the weirdest sensation, but it's
Even your
also,
breathing,
like,
it just
terrifying. Yeah, it's like, but and I think some of it, for me at least, is like that, like sometimes also medications can be helpful because you can have underlying anxieties that make it even harder to deal with when like big things happen, and then you're already kind of in this state where you don't, so.
Yeah, this is why in so many states now, if you have PTSD or a traumatic trigger syndrome, getting a marijuana card is so helpful. It's actually a great, yeah.
she's got hers.
A great antidote to trauma triggers. Keeps them from coming up and getting in the way.
Yeah, and it does. I will tell you, like, because marijuana helps me speak my thoughts. It helps me, like, they get sometimes too jumbled in there or something, especially when I'm anxious. But and I don't know why, but marijuana, like, I'm already a talkative person, but it really just like it lets it all go.
I'm going to say that it's likely some form of trauma that gets in the way of the word formation, and the marijuana helps actually reduce those traumas, so you can actually use that part. It's no longer shut down for you. It's really amazing that trauma shuts parts of us down completely. What's really amazing is that when we study conversations between men and women, men have many more trauma triggers in a conversation with a woman than a woman generally feels in that same conversation. In other words, when a woman says, hey, we need to talk about something, generally a man feels trauma triggers already, and already part of him starts to shut down. Super interesting. A man who says, okay, is in love with that woman. Because otherwise a man would say, no, don't want any part of it. I don't have all my faculties. I don't want to be part of this conversation. Nope, not doing it.
That makes sense.
It's traumatic for men to talk about women's emotions.
Yeah. We need to have, like, as like basic needs, we should have like psychology type classes like this for like elementary age children, teaching them how to like think through it and understand the physical things, like just telling them, hey, your body literally shuts down other things so that you can deal with this. So like that's normal. Because I really feel like their little brains are so freaking capable. And I know
I think it would be great.
Yeah.
And for them to know it's not your fault. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It actually means something is very right with you.
Yeah.
This is a survival technique that your body has developed.
Yeah. Well, I think I may have told you before, and I know told Emily a million times, but I had a doctor who told me when I was pretty young, because I had anxiety at a very young age. I had, medical issues and other things. So I had like reasons for anxiety, but also I was just a hyper anxious kid. Like my mom said, one of the doctors she took me to said I was the most anxious kid she'd ever seen. Like I was a little wreck. But I did have a doctor, because I would attach mine to physical things. I would thinking I was having a heart attack, or I was going to have a seizure again, or whatever it was. And he told me at a young age, like, Rachel, you know that you can actually make that thing happen with your mind, and it's actually worse because you could create scar tissue. And somehow that, like, telling me the truth helped my mind get like coping mechanisms, because like that's not who you knew me as a person, right? You didn't know that I was riddled with anxiety, did you? You didn't know that I felt like I was dying at least 3 to 4 times a week because I had like
not so you told me.
So granted, that wasn't the healthiest thing to do, and there probably were other steps I could take, but at least because he talked to me like an adult and my mind was able to make some sort of sense of it instead of just having to deal with it. Like I know that it would be so beneficial if we could just start teaching our kids younger real things, real stuff, you know, about just
And to have
getting
refreshers at key points in your life. You have some sort of therapy like before you go to college or before you get married or before you have kids, and just little
yeah,
refreshers over, these are
yeah.
things that happen. These are common. This
And if
is,
therapy wasn't just because you were mentally broken, but because it's really good to know how to process and think your own thoughts, like I wish
Mhm.
therapy could somehow just be the norm now. Like, oh, we all should be talking. Like, this isn't something that only sick people need. Like,
Medical care started off just as when things go wrong, the doctor comes to your house. And in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, we started understanding preventive care, and it became covered by insurance in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Um, Hopefully, mental health will go the same direction. It's always a little bit
make
behind
that jump.
physical health.
Yeah.
I think it could be super valuable because I think I can see how it would have been helpful for me to have even more, you know, like this is
Mhm.
how your brain's working. These are why you're shutting down. So I could
Mhm.
recognize that, acknowledge that, and try to do something different, or at least say, hey, I need help. I'm literally shutting down, you know,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and does your body create those kind of anxieties and angers to make you deal with things even though you don't want to? Like if it says, hey, now's the time to get this all sorted out, I'm going to keep pestering you with anxiety and anger until you figure out
Yes,
what's
but
going on. Because,
it's not very welcome. I mean, anxieties often
no.
come from, and I have I don't know anything about Rachel's, the ones that you were talking about, but particularly in our culture, women develop anxiety because of a sense that there's something that a woman's supposed to be like, and women tend to get a little perfectionist about it because we want to
Mhm.
be the good women that society likes, because we know there's lots of kinds of women that society doesn't like, and it's really important to stay on the side. This
I
society
want I want a woman better than any other woman ever womaned before. No, just
exactly.
kidding.
And to not be criticizable as a woman. That's the worst. If you're criticizable as a woman for something about how you look or how you act or whatever. So we have a real pandemic of perfectionism in our young women about their bodies and about their futures and about their lives. And that generates anxiety, because guess what? It's not good for a body to feel perfectionist. It's much better for a body to go, how can I enjoy life and stay alive?
yeah,
That's really what we need to focus
Yeah.
on.
yeah. Those are like really fabricated social things that I remember definitely causing me anxiety because I always like I remember so many times just knowing that I didn't fit the mold, knowing that I wasn't everything that somebody else was. Like I thought about those
Mhm,
type of things often. Like I saw
mhm,
the areas where I just wasn't as good or whatever. Um,
mhm,
and it wasn't until later in life that I saw how that stifled me and how much that
mhm,
hurt. But
mhm,
it's very much like just driven into girls' brains. I'm sure guys too, and they have their things that they're
mhm,
told they're
mhm,
supposed to be, and it's stressful.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, that is what we call social trauma, and it is
Yeah.
very, very real.
Very, very real. Too many societal norms that are based on not actually normal, based on somebody's ideal of like what they see as perfect. Although there's
Mhm.
just so many types of beings and things, and but we're all listening to
Right.
this like one thing that we're all supposed to be. And it's like so
We're all
stupid.
supposed to fit into the same box. Like,
Yeah.
just be so much
Or
the
wish
same.
we could.
Hmm?
Oh, yeah, or wish we could. We got to be
Oh,
yearning
yeah.
for it,
Yeah.
working for it, recognizing our
Right.
inadequacy. Instead of just being okay, being, you know, whatever it is, that's
Being here in the moment.
trusting. Just trusting that who we are is good, and that we're trying to do and be good, and trusting our instincts and the directions we want to go with life.
Yeah. I
So
feel like I
much
get
better.
there now, but like I worry about how do I help my girls get that without having to go through trauma to realize I am good enough, you know?
Mm.
Like I don't want them to
My,
have
Yeah.
to I don't
my
know.
guess is, Rachel, that you're already doing that just by enjoying them as they are.
I hope so.
She does that. She's
Yeah.
good like that.
And also being open to be like okay, maybe you need to talk to someone. Like, you
Mhm.
know, then there's nothing wrong with that.
Aha.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah. One of the things that's good about therapy is it gives you a chance to talk to somebody who's not involved in any of the trauma, who's not connected to it, and who can, like, if you have, say I had a disagreement with my husband, right? If I go to my friends and I say, "Hey, there's all this," then when our situation is resolved, the friends can have a hard time forgiving. Like, I don't feel that with you, Rachel, but I'm
Oh,
just saying in
I know,
general.
but other people, yeah,
Mhm.
Yes.
we're better.
We see this all the time,
So,
that the confidants are impacted by what they heard and what they experienced, and they have a hard
mhm.
time understanding why it's so easy for the person who was hurt to forgive, and it becomes hard.
Yeah. Well, I feel that if somebody hurts my family member or my friend, I'm like, ooh, you got a black mark. It's hard to let that one go, you know?
Mhm.
But I think it's just hard to let people change in general.
Yeah, none of us wants to get hurt again. The old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. None of us wants to be that person that is hurt a
Yeah.
second time by the same person. Makes us feel pretty dumb, even though it's actually kind of okay to trust someone again if you feel like you want to.
Yeah.
Nothing dumb about it. The second part of your question was, so if you recognize that there's trauma, you recognize that you're overreacting to something, you recognize there's something in there, what do you do about it? What do you decide
Yeah.
to do about it? And Rachel's question was, how do you poke at it without actually opening it back up again and making it be a big trauma? The
Mhm.
Department of Defense has spent a lot of time thinking about this because they're responsible for the mental health and the physical health of a lot of people who have been traumatized, hundreds of thousands of them. And so they've spent a lot of time researching what to do about the most egregious or harmful kinds of trauma that we experience. And they have approved 3 methods of dealing with trauma. And one of them is called exposure therapy. You just talk about it over and over and over. You re-experience it in different ways until it moves from being this explosive, what we call process through the amygdala, which are 2 little almond-shaped emotion processing organs in the brain. And they're usually the ones that are responsible for all the awful emotions that we experience that are overwhelming. And if you keep talking about an experience over and over and over again, it begins then to be processed through the other memory making organ in the brain, which is the hippocampus. And it loses all of the heavy emotion around it. Maybe you've experienced that when you've talked about an event enough that it no longer has heavy emotion on it. It's like, well, yeah, that happened to me, but I'm
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, I get that.
So you've experienced that.
Well, because like I think about my family sitting around the table telling stories and then having other people over to listen to said stories, and we've told these stories so many times and we're laughing so hard, and other people are just like this isn't normal. Like what are you laughing? Like these are not
You should
normal.
be horrified.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
one time, well, we were talking about all the different times that like one of us was left behind somewhere. And in particular, when I mean, there's 10 kids and it was a different time. But there was the one time in particular that Laura got left at Salvation Army, and it was like at Easter time, and she got an Easter basket, and I was just jealous I didn't get left. And Anthony, and we're telling all these stories and laughing, and Anthony's just like, hold on, more than one of you on more than one occasion were left somewhere, and we're just like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, like maybe you wanted to be that one. Maybe you got a prize. So we did a lot of like talking and rehashing of stories, and sometimes they were like, shit that happened that, wasn't the best time, but when you talk about it after, then you really you end up laughing about stuff. And I think that helped me develop a coping mechanism that can be
Mhm.
really helpful, which is that I can laugh at things in the moment that most people laugh at down the road. And sometimes that can be
Uh-huh.
infuriating to the other people involved. Because but I'm like, this is going to be funny. Like, this is gonna be a
Yeah.
funny story. Like,
Trust me, I know. Yeah.
sucks you're covered in cow poop right now, or it sucks this happened. But
But in my head, I'm already telling somebody and it's hilarious. Like,
You have the ability to sort of go 5 years ahead and just look back.
kind of
Yep.
sometimes
That
just
is
to
a
be like,
skill.
okay, this sucks right now, but this is gonna be a really funny story. Like,
uh-huh.
yeah.
See,
That's
and
cool.
when I deal with something hard, sometimes I'll like withdraw into myself and I don't want to talk to anybody about it. It's like, oh no, this is mine. I don't want to like throw negativity out into the world and I don't want to cause trouble for anybody. I don't want to I just don't want to deal with that. I can just deal with it myself. And it'll just like be this heavy weight on my shoulders until I just say something to somebody, not even asking them to help, just say, dude, you know what happened? Like I got pulled over and but just throwing things out there. But anyway, yeah, something traumatic happened. This is what it was. That's it. And it helps a lot. It seems to
Mhm. This is where we can take a lesson from kids on the playground. When they scrape their knee, they don't just go, ah, brush it. Somebody has to teach them just to brush it off and go back to playing. When they scrape their knee, they want to show somebody. They want to say, ow, look. No, you can see it. Look. Even if it's not obvious, they
I
want
broke it.
somebody to see it. This is how we survive as human beings. When it tends to get too heavy for other people is when we've got blame in it, when we've got the causticness or the bitterness of this is somebody else's fault. But when we actually own our own feelings, even if somebody else did it, I mean, the policeman who stopped me for no reason, if we're going to go with your story, is the
Yeah.
one who did it. But when we share the story, if what we're sharing is how frightened I was, or how I was in a hurry, but I had to be stopped and be respectful to this person who wasn't respectful to me, or whatever it is, when we talk about our own feelings about it, we actually are putting out into the world something essential. Even if we're interrupting other people's world, we're actually putting out into the world, I'm human and I'm reaching for you as a human being. It allows our children to be human with us when we say, I'm just really having a rough day. I think we're just having hot dogs for dinner or whatever,
Mhm.
whatever is acceptable to have when maybe it's oatmeal. I don't know, pancakes, but to be able to say, I just don't have it in me, I'm not doing very well, is an important thing to be able to say when we're not doing well. And this is why, the primary song, and I bring this up a lot because it bugs me. If you chance to meet a frown, do not let it stay. Quickly turn it upside down, smile that frown away. Don't let anybody know you had any bad feeling. I think this is what you're speaking to, Emily. You're saying, actually, it helps so much to be able to say, I have a frowny face. I don't want to turn it upside down yet.
Feeling it.
Mhm.
It's
I
okay.
think it's so important for our kids to see it too, because I didn't have a lot of emotional things to like see growing up. Everything was just kind of like, if it was big, you just kind of like move on. This too shall pass. We never
Wow.
talked about anything. It was always just this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And so I didn't learn how
Wow.
to deal with or manage. So when my girls sometimes get upset, if something gets heated, I'm like, you need to know it's okay for things to get heated, because sometimes you have to speak up. You have to say, when something's
Oh
wrong, or just
my
to see
gosh,
you have
yeah.
a bad day, and so that they don't grow up and they have a bad day and they're like, what's wrong with me? How come I never saw that? How come it's just a me problem?
I hope it's okay if I connect some dots here, Rachel, because not dealing with emotional things makes us stuff them. Okay, this too shall pass, but it still goes in there somewhere.
Mhm.
It goes in this little bag of stuff. And when that bag of stuff gets full, guess what comes out? Anxiety.
Mhm.
That's what creates anxiety, is that sense of I've got so much in there that I can't deal with.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens that one child in the family absorbs all the anxiety for everyone else. So other people can kind of get off without it. but one person takes it all, observes it, pulls it in, and stuffs it into her own bag. And I don't know if that was your situation, Rachel,
I
but
don't
it
know.
makes
I
sense.
mean, yeah.
I could see you doing that.
Yeah. Not to say
Absolutely.
everybody else doesn't have their own anxieties, but I'm definitely one of the anxiety cases. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so interesting. You can connect that with, we didn't talk about emotions. We didn't acknowledge them. We didn't say, well, that was a big blow up in the family yesterday. How are you doing?
Blow-ups
Did you
didn't
get yelled at
happen.
by mom?
Blow-ups didn't
But
No.
happen. You hit
Okay,
it.
here's
Literally,
a Rachel
I did never see
story.
it.
Yeah. So, Mom, I don't know if you remember this, but when we were teenagers and we were hanging out at home, and Rachel got a phone call saying that her brother had been in this massive accident. He may lose his leg, he may die. We don't know. It's horrible, this horrific accident. And do
Wow.
you remember this?
Yeah, I'm just laughing
And
at myself and my reaction in this now.
yeah, and I was like almost brought to tears, and I'm like, what are we
Do you
gonna
want me to
do?
take you
What?
home?
Yeah, and she's like, no, we're good. Like
This happens all the
that's
time.
that sucks. He's fine. Like
They'll let me
it was
know.
just
Processing
such a
needed here.
this, and me being over dramatic, I'm like, let's sit in this and
Let's
just
hold a vigil.
yeah, right. I'm gonna light a
Call that
candle right
overdramatic.
now. Like no,
We're
but
not overdramatic.
At least you
just two very
experienced
different
it. I did not.
responses.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? He was okay. You knew your brother, and he was just fine. And knowing him, if he'd have lost his leg, he'd be like, okay, sweet, I got one leg. Like
Well, he did lose 3 out of the 4 muscles. He doesn't have a quad anymore. He has a un. And then he ended up breaking that same leg again in a skydiving accident, and then they took out the metal rod there, so now he doesn't have that anymore. So
Really?
all's well that
Wow.
ends well.
And he was up wakeboarding, or no,
Yeah, with like
what
a
were we
thing
doing?
coming out of his heart. He had made like a device
Yeah.
or something to protect the port that he had going into his body following that.
He wanted to go wave running, so he
Yeah.
improvised.
For a smart guy, he's not sounding real smart right now, but he's just an adventurous guy.
Yeah, he's just
I believe he's a smart guy.
that's
And
just
he
who he
obviously
is.
didn't give up. I think that's great.
Yeah.
No.
But it does illustrate different ways of how our bodies decide to manage something that there's no way to manage that. There's no way that
No.
that the two of you could have done anything to make Rachel's brother's situation any better. It's a very helpless moment.
I think I knew
And
that
in that
in the moment. It was like, what am I gonna do?
What
Like
am I going to do?
I've been in these situations so many times where what am I gonna do has happened. That
Mhm.
I just
Which is a decent strategy for handling something that you have no control over. And at the same time, at some point, if that's ever triggering this feeling of being helpless or this feeling of being overwhelmed, it's great to go back and name the feeling that you had. Step number 1. Step number 2, share it with someone. And this incident with the brother may never actually come up as a trauma. So I'm not suggesting this particular incident needs any attention, but it does illustrate naming the feeling, being able to identify what it does to your body, where you're starting to feel tense. Body scans are really an important thing to do when you're trying to deal with anxiety or trauma. Where do I feel the anxiety? Where is it coming from? And where am I starting to get tense? Where do I hold this particular experience?
right
Where
here.
do I hold this sense?
I hold it in a ball
there.
right here.
And if you can put a name on it, like, when I start to feel incapable, or when I start to feel inadequate, or when I start to feel unsafe, or when I start to feel just plain helpless, where does that go? Because different trauma scripts may have different tension sites. Some people feel it in the pit of their stomach. Some people feel it, just like you said, Rachel, right here. I've had people say, I feel it in my fist. That's where I start to get tense. Or I start to clench my buttocks. Different trauma scripts have different places where we feel it. Go ahead.
No, sorry. No, you go ahead. Finish yours, then I'll ask.
Well, to go from, most of us prefer not to do exposure therapy about things that we're triggered by. We just don't want to keep talking about them. Like, most people don't go to therapy because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to bring it up again because they know they're going to feel those tense feelings for weeks going forward. You know, I won't be able to digest food for 3 weeks if I talk about what happened to me when I was 12. So I don't want to go to therapy and do that. So exposure therapy is effective, but also what we call re-traumatizing. The second form of therapy that the Department of Defense has endorsed is called cognitive behavioral therapy for PTSD, or CBT for PTSD. And there's some really good models of doing cognitive behavioral therapy. And it involves thinking errors, thinking about your thinking errors and reshifting them, which I believe does the same thing as exposure therapy without getting deep into it. What it does is it takes all this unprocessed stuff in the back of our brain, what I call the yellow tape stuff that's been processed through the amygdala, and it does this electronic brainwave connection with the prefrontal cortex, which is the healing, perspective taking, I can do almost anything I need to do part of the brain. And when the connection is made, brain waves from the back to the front, you don't even have to actually consciously understand it, but you begin to feel more healed and like the trauma is more distant, and we become less reactive. And that's what we're aiming for.
So I was just going to ask, because you were talking about the different ways you were like people hold it in. Have you ever heard somebody describe their anxiety as, and this is me, like whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed by somebody else or a situation, just really overwhelmed by it, like, or it's coming down on me, I will get a sensation of like things getting bigger and smaller. And I know it's not really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very disorienting
Interesting.
in my mind for things to get that like I could just
Mhm.
and even if it's not me physically being, but I'll imagine an object and it will just be getting like ginormously huge and then small, and I'm like, what is that? What is that?
Isn't that the brain does the most interesting things abstractly to
Yeah,
help us recognize we are not responding in our fully capacitated self, but something actually is impinging on our ability to take it all in and do well with it. And that's a clue for you.
yeah,
Here it is. It's happening.
yeah. Maybe it's because I'd never had anything happen, so I'd never learned how to take things in, and I was so good at blocking it, and then my brain was like pushing it away with like pulses, or I don't even know. But it was like this, like I literally couldn't take it in, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. And we do reach our limit on what we can take in, which is why it's super important. We'll go back to this men and women conversation for men to be able to say, I'm flooded. I can't take any more in. Because usually when they get flooded, they keep trying and then they end up saying something harsh or pushbackish or something they regret later. And I'm making generalizations, and a lot of this is socialization. I'm not saying, this is how people are. And there's a broad spectrum of what we call male, female behaviors. But in our world, it's typical for this to occur. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for helping us learn how to deal with the traumas and how to even just recognize them.
Well, let me say one more thing about the third way that the Department of Defense says, because the third way is less re-traumatizing and also takes less time. And it's what we call eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR. Actually helps the brain make the kind of shift that I talked about without any conscious effort. So it isn't re-traumatizing. And then we also have accelerated resolution therapy, and we have neurofeedback. There's a lot of amazing brain therapies that actually help people overcome the traumas that make us overreact to things.
What do you think about like psilocybin?
The research about them is so fantastic. We still, there's still a lot left to do, but so far, it's super exciting.
Yeah.
It enables profound shifts in people's ability to deal with things from the past. I can't wait until they're available for therapists like me to use in practice.
Yeah, my favorite, I haven't tried it yet, but I really want to because of this analogy that I heard about everybody's brains and the pathways that we naturally take is like sledding. How once you have a bunch of people on a hill and you start sledding, eventually we're all going down the same few things. And eventually those are the only paths your brain can take. Like it doesn't even see things, it's blind to it, and it's going to take these paths. And that psilocybins are like a fresh coating of snow that helps to take different pathways down and like get to different. So I'm like, I'm really interested in trying it, but I'm also really interested in doing it legally because I don't want to get in trouble. But I hate how demonized some of those things have been because they got put in together with other things and not actually studied or like thought about. It was just kind of
Yep. Fears
all or
keep us
nothing.
away from a lot of things that could be really, really helpful to us. And in the 70s, people were so afraid of anything that sounded like it might be a drug.
I feel like people still are. I mean, they're better, but overall, like I saw my mom, who's diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, end up getting her medicinal marijuana card, and I saw how hard it was for her to use it.
Mhm.
And I know she even asked her bishop and stuff like that, and she had told me times when it had helped, and she said, "Yeah, the crack in my lip is gone," and stuff like that. But ultimately, in my mind, I feel like she convinced herself that it wasn't helping because it was a drug. And it felt bad to do something that had been ingrained in her that it was a drug. And
It's
I'm
an
like,
example of
that's
one of those
based
ruts
off
in
of
the snow.
lies. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, whenever you're licensed with psilocybins, I'll come take a trip. That'll be fun.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. You down him?
Oh, I don't know enough about it, but I'm not against it. Oh, there was something, this is just a little addition. There was something that you'd mentioned earlier about the if you chance to meet a frown song, don't let it stay. And I remember feeling that going through something really, really difficult. And I was just like looking for some kind of answers. Like I need just some kind of some therapeutic help. And somebody sent me a talk by Brene Brown on, and she was talking about you need to choose to be happy. Like it doesn't matter what's happening, you need to choose to be happy. And I was so mad at that point. I was like, screw you. Like I get to choose. I'm doing this to myself. I'm unhappy because I just didn't choose it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no. And from that moment, I'm like, I think there's some kinds of anger and sadness and feelings, overreactions or not, that are really important to feel. And it's important to experience them, even though it really sucks. And it would be more fun to be happy all the time. Like nobody would choose to be
Yeah.
sad if they didn't have to. I watched a movie the other night with my son, and he's 6, and it came to a part in the movie that was sad, and he just grabbed the remote and shut it off, and he's like, I don't want to be sad. I'm like, all right, well, so he's got it, um, but no, I think sometimes it's really important to feel those things and to experience them even when they're hard because it leads to change.
I think I
It's
used to
really
really like
important.
watching sad movies because it gave me a place to cry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to validate the feelings that you have. And in those moments when life was hard and you wanted some validation for the feelings that you were having those feelings validated is the thing that would help you heal, not telling you to choose different feelings. We really don't choose the feelings. I mean, sometimes the thoughts we have generate feelings. Like if I think that this person is against me and that person is against me and that person is against me, I will have some feelings that go along with that. The way to get away from that is to say, I'm feeling these heavy feelings. Where are they coming from? Not, I shouldn't have these feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I say, where are they coming from? I care about these feelings. I care about how upset my stomach is. I care about how tight everything is. I care about how anxious I feel. And then I recognize it's because I'm thinking this person is my enemy and that one is too. Then I can rethink that. But if I just tell myself I shouldn't feel this way, I should feel happy, I should choose happiness, it will just go deeper and deeper, and I will feel more and more anxious. And then I will also feel self-loathing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you. And thank you for talking to us about trauma. And I mean, it's a heavy topic. It can be, I don't know. It's really personal for everybody. Nobody experiences trauma the same way, and it can be hard to feel like somebody else understands what you're going through and what you're thinking and the whole process.
Why it impacts you so much.
Mm-hmm. It can be hard to overcome the traumas we've inflicted on others. I mean, none of us is perfect. We all do stupid things, and sometimes we do really stupid things. And I think, I don't know, getting through all of those feelings is just a huge part of life.
Yeah. And you
So
choosing
impactful.
to take a position where you there is so much need, and it has to be hard not to take on other people's woes and problems and stuff. I commend you for that, because I don't have that
Yeah.
in me, I don't think.
I would have a hard time leaving that at the door and being like, okay,
Somebody
time to
else's
focus on my
problem.
life.
Yeah,
Like, yeah. So thank you for choosing to carry everyone's burdens
yeah.
and for being my mom, you know.
You are my dad. You're my dad. Wookie, wookie, wookie.
That's
Thank you
a
for
big
being
job in and of
amazing, both
itself.
of you. Oh yeah.
So
Such hard work these days, Emily.
depends on the day.
All
You
right.
did a very good job.
Well, thanks for joining us again. This was
Thank
fun.
you. You're wonderful. I love your podcast.
Yes, we love you too.
Love you.
Okay.
Come again.
Bye, Liz. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Subscribe up there.
Subscribe.
There's a subscribe up there.
Okay.
Like the button.
Okay.